The Longest Day, a movie from 1962, directed by Anakin, Andrew Martin, and Bernard Wicki, starring.
Same movie, basically, like American Pie, pretty
Right,
much.
yeah, basically the same movie.
Same,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It's cast of big cast of a lot of big names, but among them John Wayne, Henry Fonda, Robert Mitchum, Richard Burton, Rod Steiger, and Sean Connery. The IMDb plot summary: the events of D-Day told on a grand scale from both the Allied and German points of view. So I picked this movie to start with as it's a representation of a lot of the World War II films that I watched as a young kid growing up, and I feel that I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and definitely World War II was still so much so in the public culture. There was the generation that fought in that war was dubbed the greatest generation, and there's all this like throwback to World War II and what America was doing in that war, and sort of we're great because we were involved in winning that war, and in a way kind of you're sort of taught that we were the only ones that sort of won it, and they kind of leave out the part that the Russians basically more so defeated the Nazis in the US. But this movie was a movie that I watched a lot as a young kid. Actually, around 4th of July, sometimes I would put it on, and because it's a big, long 3-hour movie, it was fun to watch around the holidays. But yeah, so for me, I think because growing up, the pride in America and what it meant to be an American, to me, was so tied up in World War II, and the victory that we had in that war, and the militarism of that war, and our sort of power overseas, which was, I'd never really thought about it too much, actually, until, quite recently, how much that did leave an impact on me. And that's how I sort of viewed America, as basically just the country that won World War II. And this movie, I think, was a big part of it. And, so the film, like I said, is epic, huge cast, all these people were real people. So you're learning about the history of what the US did. And it was an incredible accomplishment too. All the planning that went into the invasion, I think it spends about an hour before it even gets to the actual D-Day invasion. So there's a lot of like how, we are smart and we're tricky in the enemy. So it's not just about our military power, it's also our intelligence and our smarts. We're kind of outsmarting the Germans. So it's, again, I think nowadays there's a stereotype, sort of America is just strong kind of bully in the world, and it's just kind of dumb but very powerful. And what this movie does, I think, is try to paint the picture of like, no, like we had a big army, but this is a very hard thing to do. This was not a sure victory whatsoever. So I always just loved that, like that build up to the invasion, and then when it happens, it's this very realistic tone to the whole movie. It doesn't feel like propaganda either, which a lot of these World War II movies, even nowadays, kind of starts to turn into that. This film was made in 1962. So, a lot of these people, actually, the cast members who are in the film fought in the war. I think even some of the people, there's a couple soldiers that like play themselves even in the film.
Oh, wow.
So I think that kind of helps, like, because they actually lived through it. They don't kind of go back and try to paint too rosy of a picture of it. It definitely is, like I said, very, very realistic, and painted to me this picture of the U.S. is great. Because we, fought in World War II and won, all the sacrifices you see, all, some of the characters you get to know, they get killed. So you're feeling like, wow, like we kind of gave up a lot. We sacrificed something for the rest of the world, is sort of the feeling you kind of get from this. So you feel good about, oh, wow, America, like we accomplished something hard, using our brains and our brawn, and we sacrificed. It wasn't easy, but we did it to free another country. It wasn't like the Germans were invading the US. So there's that feeling that military power can be seen as altruistic, which, as a kid, again, that was something that I believed. It was fun rewatching it too. I hadn't seen it actually a couple years, and I remembered almost like lines from it. And because again, I watched it so much as a young child, it was really fun to revisit it, and it still holds up incredibly well. I mean, some of these scenes of the D-Day invasion is just huge. I mean, all these soldiers and it was all practical. This wasn't like a Saving Private Ryan CGI thing. It was just incredible. In a way, actually, I feel it was more powerful than the Saving Private Ryan scenes because of the scale they capture in this. Is just like, whoa, like you really believe this stuff is going on. But yeah, I really like this film. I think it still holds up well.
Yeah. Now, first of all, I'm just impressed that you were watching this movie as a kid, and that too, like over and over again. That's pretty impressive.
I loved it. I just really I loved it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how many kids had that experience. So that's pretty incredible. I'd never watched the movie. I'd heard about it, but I
Mhm.
was very glad to watch it. It didn't feel that long, even though I was intimidated by the length
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
it. And yeah, everything you touched on, like it's just brilliantly crafted, and feels real. The stakes feel real. And you're right, like often war movies, even though they might be brilliantly crafted and mounted, they become either propaganda films, or they become too melodramatic, or they
Mhm.
become too messagey, or what have you. Maybe there's something about the length of the movie you're so kind of submerged into it, that it sort of helps in a way.
Mhm.
Like if this movie was shorter, actually all those sort of things, the problems that we touched on, will become more apparent, I think.
Yeah.
And it's also fun to see all these great, Hollywood actors appear, in these roles. Like I'm not that familiar like you are with the World War II history, only to a certain degree, so I don't
Mhm.
know the back history and such of the people involved. Some, maybe a few I had heard of, but mostly
Mhm.
I hadn't.
Mhm.
So yeah, to have these Hollywood, icons sort of come in and bring flesh and light to these people, that was pretty cool. I'm sure that means even more to you because you know who these people were in real life.
Mhm.
The only person that I felt sort of took me out in the moment was Sean Connery. I'm like, what
Oh.
are you doing?
One one
Also,
of one of his early roles, like one of his
yeah,
pre-Bond. So this was,
yeah,
he was not a big guy at the time.
I
You didn't like
figured.
his part?
No, it just took, that felt very movie like to me, that, oh, we are
Oh.
in a war zone and such, and yet I'm going to be sort of, funny and crack jokes and what have you a little bit, which not saying people wouldn't do, but
Mhm.
Sean Connery also not a good actor in my mind, never
Oh.
was,
Okay. Okay.
I
Okay.
mean, the movie we just discussed last time,
Last Crusade.
Last Crusade was
Yeah.
probably one of his best, but that's like, towards the end of his career.
Mhm.
He does a very, he's movie star person, in
Mhm.
my
Mhm.
mind,
Mhm.
not an actor. Versus everybody else in this movie is a movie star and an actor. So I
Fair.
think that
Yeah.
stands out. The other thing I noticed was, and this is some kind of silly to say, but because it's a black and white movie, the initial part of the movie before the invasion happens, even though German people are speaking in German, there's subtitles and what have you, but at some point, the uniforms start to blend in. The little kids on both sides start to blend in, and
Mm.
I am not, even though my dad was in the army, in the Indian army, so I have some relationship personally with the armed forces.
Mhm.
I've never really been, a war person per se. As much as I love, World War II history and World War One history, all that
Mhm.
stuff is amazing and very intriguing. But at the end of it, what I'm left with is just thinking about how young these people were,
Oh yeah.
mostly on both sides.
Mhm.
And yeah, they've been, they're doing a great thing. They're excited to do this and such, but at the same time, they could be spending their time doing something else, on both sides. So it's not lost on me. As much as you appreciate and you rara the victory and everything, I can't help but I not think about the other side and just the harms of war. And
Yeah.
I think this movie does a pretty good job by not being messagey about it. At the same time, because you're so submerged in these humans and their lives, that the weight of those sacrifices and the weight of the war itself is on your shoulders as you're watching the movie throughout, and
Mhm.
only sort of ratchets up as you go through. So yeah, but great movie. I'm so glad I got to watch it.
Yeah, that's a good insight. Another thing I think this movie does well too is that it shows the Germans as real people too. Like they're not
Yeah,
cartoony villains, or
no,
you're
except for one guy who's the pilot. I'm like, why are you talking
oh
the way you are? What is
yeah.
happening? But
Uh,
everybody else feels pretty normal and real.
yeah, but then it also in a way then makes it more if they were cartoony, it's like then the victory that the US and the Allies would have would sort of somehow seem less not
Earned.
important, earned. There we go. Yeah, less earned, because you're just fighting cartoon villains.
Right.
So I always liked how you were seeing the Germans as real people, understanding what decisions they were making, with all the subtitles too, added some gravitas. So I think
Yeah.
that also makes it a little bit far removed from propaganda, though, you can make the argument that every film, especially about war, is propaganda on some level. And I definitely can see some of the things I pointed out earlier in terms of shaping the US as always the good guys and all these sort of things. This war definitely made me feel that, or this movie definitely made me feel that way. But yeah, it's definitely could have been a lot more like on the nose propaganda. And that's what I always appreciated about this film.
Yeah. Totally, and that on that point of like the Germans, even the generals and such who want more support from the Führer, and they're not getting it because the Führer has gone to sleep.
Right. Yeah.
And I thought those details were very important because those guys who are fighting the war on those side, do they even know why they're in it? Do they even believe in it? Maybe, mostly not, So that's the thing about war, is that it's usually a few people at the top and their madness and their machinations that make everybody else dragged into it and pay the price for it. That's just my opinion.
Totally. No, yeah, we should do an episode on war maybe at some point. I think there's a lot we can pull apart here, but
totally.
Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now, or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.